Hey all, Siege here, and today I want to continue holding my gaze, if you will, on what I feel are the most interesting things to be looking out for with all the narrative we're about to receive. And, well, maybe this time you can even help me uncover some things I haven't been able to find where the appropriate connections exist. In fact, in the spirit of such a thing, while I have finally figured out what the Indifference is saying at the beginning of the Whispers in the Wall quest, as denoted by the subtitles added, I can't say I'm very close to translating it yet. What do you think? Can you help me out? The Cavia have actually themselves uttered some of these words to us. But so far I don't believe I've found a definitive source for any sort of full translation. That being said, I do think with your help, especially those who are good with understanding context clues, we can maybe have much of what we've been told thus far, both by the Murmur and even the Cavia, translated before Warframe 1999. Let me know in the comments if there is anything you've been able to uncover. I'd be curious to hear that. By looking at the Warframe wiki and utilizing the little bit of void speak they offer within the transcript for that particular quest, we can see that this is actually Zata, or truth, in Voidtongue.
Its heralds are the stars it fells, the sky and earth aflame.
Even more interesting is the fact that they have another well-established phrase documented, that of, which they claim to be Lok, Tok, Tenok. Now personally I can't shake the feeling that Tenok almost assuredly means Tenno in Voidtongue, which would make sense given that Tenno would be a kind of made-up word specifically for the children of the Zariman 10-0 and thus would most likely look very close to the same word we understand it to be in Voidtongue. And Lok, well, that's understood as void. So what do you think Tok means? Now consider that Lok may also refer to the phrase, "From brooding gulfs are we beheld by that which bears no name," or perhaps it's the entire passage Entrati associates with it.
Lok, void. From brooding gulfs are we beheld by that which bears no name. Its heralds are the stars it fells, the sky and earth aflame. Corporeal laws are unwrit as suns and love retreat. To cosmic madness, laws submit, though stalwart minds entreat. In luminous space, blackened stars they gaze, accuse, deny. Roiling, moaning, this realm of ours in madness lost shall die. Carrion hordes trill their profane accord with eldritch plans. To cosmic forms from tangent planes, we end as we began.
Does that change your thought process at all? This guttural chant in its entirety can be heard repeatedly, specifically during Whispers, and may even come to be what Rel originally heard him saying during the Chains of Harrow. Now, perhaps Rel just heard tapping. We've heard that too, and I admit that remains the most likely explanation, but I can't help but hear how similar they sound. And wonder if, well, he hasn't been telling us something for a long time. Something that appears as if we are just on the cusp of understanding. And if this does have any merit, it would most likely mean this phrase is pretty relevant. As far as its cadence is concerned, the 1, 2, 3, it's been its hallmark since that Chains of Harrow quest, this time making its presence felt within one of the most alluring vessels of the time period. It's been well established that Party of Your Lifetime is a kind of expertly crafted earworm within the 1999 universe that also appears to act in an almost subliminal manner, appealing to the masses and simultaneously priming the populace's mind for a willing assimilation of some degree. And this is only one of the various propaganda programs that are being implemented on the apparently unaware society. The full lyrics of the track I went over in a previous video, but something I failed to mention that was stated by a number of commenters in said video, I feel is absolutely paramount in understanding the underlying narrative of 1999. Whereas there still seems to be a bit of uneasiness present,
management gives us one more passive-aggressive smile. I'm gonna snap.
There are clear signs the Void has come to some kind of accord with the infestation. Although as a whole, it's clearly not completely on board with the idea, be it from dissenting hive minds or the far scarier proposition that it is in fact being rewritten in the past and somehow these changes are manifesting in the present time. The proof is subtle, but it's there. Prior to Whispers in the Walls, there exist transcriptions from an unauthorized broadcast of Nora Knight's pirate radio program that allude to the coming events of that update, and it's within one of these, discussing anomalous behavior the infested moon of Deimos continues to portray, that we are shown the origin of this infamous rhythm as a kind of incessant knocking a corpus researcher has only begun noticing amongst the environment. This same rhythm of Orcan influence, of course, is most likely derived from Entrati's implied interest in those same waltzes, and with Online's lyrics, we are most likely being shown the Void's influence permeating that variant of the infestation, but also the one on Deimos in the present time, and it's within these same recordings we are introduced to a concept we really haven't experienced before. The infestation showing the distinct physical signs of stress, concern, fear. Bear in mind, this same entity will swarm Warframes and even the Tenno, and yet here, it's scared, trying its best to stay as hidden as it can. And this dread, almost anxiety-like, may be born of the fact that in our time, a new form of the infestation arrives, and it may not necessarily desire to coexist with this void-attuned variation. In fact, we may even come to find that it is in fact a threat to the one that already exists, especially if it is under new management. And it would certainly explain the behavior Letrox describes, especially if the hive mind or minds that govern our current variant don't believe they are a match for this enhanced alternative. Honestly, it's not hard to understand why. An adaptation of this sort would essentially merge two of the Tenno's worst threats into one. The Murmur, seemingly born of the indifference, and the infestation, a creation of what would come to be the Orcan. I believe it can be argued that while the Tenno too control the Void they utilize to interact with the Warframes, in that same light, pardon the pun, the children of the Zariman have demonstrated themselves to be selfless for the most part, using their powers for the greater good. And that's a good thing, because evil Tenno would obviously be a huge problem. Now, I've argued in the past that the Indifference's actions, creating doppelgangers with their own personas, are beginning to act in a very similar manner to that of a virus. And the infestation, well, it behaves in what many might at first believe to be the same way. But what sets them apart, so far at least, is that the Murmur is selective, to at least some degree, in choosing its host, whereas the infestation has largely taken on the reputation by design of not having much in the way of discretion in what it will assimilate and thus convert, only appearing to have a preference in what it's eating at that particular moment. The band members, most likely hive minds of some sort themselves, or parts to a whole if you will, is obviously highly influential within the society portrayed, but the level of influence may shed a light on what this depiction of Entrati was actually getting at. That the infestation has already overtaken this area, and potentially a whole lot more. See, something happened recently within Halvania Mall that caused it to be in the disrepair it appears in the first place. This may even be the same thing Amir is referencing here.
I'm coming too. Guys, it won't be like last time, I promise.
Not to mention, this version of 1999 is a war zone, which in the presence of a plague would make sense, but aside from a militarized unit, and bear in mind if the Scaldra are precursors to the Grineer, something many have speculated based on appearance, they would essentially be clones to begin with, well, then where is everybody? Those that Entrati supposedly helped. How late are we exactly, and is this the event that has seemingly turned the hex against Entrati, or is it just more reinforcement? It's no surprise the imagery of him being revered in the manner of a god exists, as it matches up with his apparent savior-like standing in what he describes in his notes.
I went among the denizens of the plague year like a savior, my hands filled with healing.
Those inflicted with horrific ailments will often deify the bearer of a cure, no matter their character. History has shown far too often, and I imagine Earth 1999 of this world to be no different. Of course, this all rests on the idea of two things. One, that this Entrati, this version of the man, still exists as an ally in our assigned conflict, as even Lloyd puts this concept into question.
Albrecht rarely smiled after his return from the void, and never like that. I smashed the casket for nothing! It followed him anyway!
And two, something we'll get into a bit later is what exactly healing in his notes really means. Now, we discussed the idea of who the character is that is walking toward Arthur during Whispers in the Walls, and there's actually another scene that is eerily reminiscent in an unsettling manner experienced a bit earlier. Notice the head tilt, hands behind his back. The only thing that's really different is their legs, but I feel like that would have required an unnatural movement for Entrati walking down the escalator, and instead of bringing attention to it in such a dramatic way, added this subtle change to produce a dissonance, enough to not immediately make an association between the two. And as I look at it in hindsight, does this not apparent similar pose, especially within the same quest, and further a pose we aren't unfamiliar with by any stretch of the imagination, strongly insinuate the presence of foreshadowing for what was to come? Almost as if the man in the wall knew we would be doing, well, exactly what we did. He does seem to have a history of leading the Tenno where he wants them to go, or believe what he needs them to.
Feeling better, kiddo? I killed him. Isa. Did you now? Is that how you remember it? Yes. Good.
And it leads me to consider the ramifications of time in the Warframe universe, and something Fibonacci and Lloyd specifically discuss.
So long as the indifference is missing a digit, it is confined to the strands of Kra. Don't ask, your tiny mind would likely pop under the strain of understanding. This limitation is our one hope.
Do not patronize the Tenno fish. The strands of Kra are merely void renderings of the chains of cause and effect. Conceptually embodied timelines, if you will.
Papa's daughter excelled at explaining complicated concepts in childish terms. I see now where she learned it.
Within the context of this scene, I personally can offer my best idea of what's actually occurring within Warframe's dimensions, timelines, or both. Although any definitive thought of how this works from anyone other than DE themselves is always speculative in some nature. It's incredibly complicated, with incidents to prove and disprove a number of potential ideas intent on locking it down. And interestingly enough, Fibonacci himself remarks on the quaint simplicity of how the successively complex process is described by Lloyd, by mocking him in the process. This specific information, in conjunction with what we've recently learned about realities, time, and dimensions in Warframe, I think puts Entrati's final message within his notes in a new perspective. In the previous passage, Fibonacci discusses the concept of Kra, or as Entrati understands it, time. This seems to infer that before the Void, There was only one timeline, a prime timeline if you will. When Entrati accessed the Void, what he most likely saw, a perfect copy of his own laboratory, most likely because this area was his entire life, the only real thing on his mind, and was created from an extreme fear of the unknown. The Void he had only peered into for the first time, with disastrous consequences. From here, the strands have continued to manifest based on, most likely, highly emotional states in void-saturated situations, both unintentional and, I'm guessing, induced as well. The conceptually embodied effects of which may continue to generate, perhaps even introducing a new void entity with each one, as this appears to occur in dire situations, much like the scenario posed during the New War. Experiencing events of this magnitude would obviously induce severe distress in anyone, and as Euleria explained,
the Void offers humanity the truer telling of eternalism that now is merely a facet of a great block.
My head hurts.
It is relative, and we can change the frame. The tyranny of the present absolute is overthrown. Tomorrow is now its equal.
Would allow for a reversal of the catastrophic scenario by utilizing the Void to respawn at the proper moment within the timeline that was created via emotional outburst for this very desire, copying this new corrected phrase of moments and pasting them into the prime timeline. Most likely the reason why there seemed to be very little in the way of actual paradoxes. The functioning timeline adjusts for the alter within it, allowing for both circumstances to be real at the same time. In fact, it makes the deal our Tenno made come into focus a bit if you consider the possibility that the powers the Tenno were given were actually ones they chose to manifest, versus being ones provided to them, perhaps even on a subconscious level. This holds up in every known quantity of the indifference. The holdfasts? Well, it's pretty obvious they wanted redemption for the poor decisions they made at the very end of their lives, so they were given the chance to move on and make the ones they wanted instead. Not just reborn, but reborn to exist on the Zeraman 10-0, a void embodiment in its own right, but injected in a very similar manner to the Coda Worm from 1999. The original crew didn't survive, but these entities, well, they do. Conceptually recreated back into our existence. Wish granted. Is it safe to say their souls remain intact on this vessel? They certainly retain their memories, if nothing else. Then we have Entrati, a mediocre, awkward scientist that desired nothing more than to become the man he thought his daughter saw him as. After the encounter with the Void, well, look around. Is this not what he wanted? Seems pretty impressive for what he described himself as initially, and given how we arrive into this strange area in the first place. Would it be so hard to consider that the entirety of this laboratory, with all its incredible technology, were mere concepts within his head, rather than being built with human or even artificial labor, manifested as his greatest desire, all based on his original lab's decor, essentially the first of his conceptually embodied strands of time, explaining why such an expansive area can't be seen on the Deimos map. And if this is true, then wish granted. How about Baroque Katir, who desired a method by which to combine his offerings amongst his other variants, those on other platforms, breaking the fourth wall and allowing for a unified selection of goods to provide to everyone equally. And in that, wish granted. The Drifter's manifestation of Euleria's Tales of Duviri, essentially escaping the isolation of the failed Zeraman jump after, as far as he describes it,
You ought to be more careful. I might not be around next time.
Around? Okay, so what is this, then? Are you from the...
Future? Nah. But that'd be a lot easier to get now, wouldn't it? As far as I can make out, you're the me that got rescued from this shit, and I'm the you that did not. Not sure which of us got it worse.
Not being visited by the man on the wall. After all, he doesn't say that he refused help, rather that he was the one that wasn't saved from this, making my previous assumption of this character's denial of a deal of some sort being refused potentially incorrect, and may start to put the pieces together why this hand in particular is the one the Tenno make their own deal with. Something that requires a video all its own to properly explain, but I promise you it's coming. Now, it may not seem like in our current timeline that there are an overwhelming number of stories regarding the Indifference and its copies, but in others, Duviri in particular,
their eyes were a deep and lustrous black, their mouths fixed in a constant grin. None of the sages saw them enter or leave. The Hollow Children did not speak, nor did they participate in class in any way, except to giggle unnervingly when the subject of the void was mentioned. When adults came to collect their children, they noticed an additional oddity. Among the Hollow Children were exact duplicates of themselves when they were younger. Each day, there were more of them. Thrax ordered the island destroyed, but when Loden descended from the sky to ravage it, the Aura Worm found it had broken free of its own accord. Thrax did not give the order to pursue.
Well, it just seems to get harder and harder to distinguish our plight from, say, something like this.
My name is Legion, for we are many.
But in that same passage, we also get to see a kind of camaraderie between these variants, don't we? With the ending of Whispers in the Walls doing little to disprove this. Both void entities plotting their next move, seeming to culminate in the Lotus Eaters. They have their own agendas, and yet they are unified, which brings us back to online. There exists a fan page, including bios for each of the members, changed to reveal a kind of mirrored truth. While the very existence of its page in its altered states is concerning at best, it's what can be taken from it when examined a bit closer that's the real problem. First, we have Hard Drive, and he's not the type of person you should put on speakerphone. Hard Drive is strong but sensitive. He really knows how to treat a girl and make her feel like she's the only one in the world. He's always positive and focused on the bright side of life. And that's important, because whenever things get tough, there's always time to party. Hard Drive tells it like it is and isn't afraid to speak his mind. Don't let the muscles and the tough guy act fool you, though. He's more of a cuddly teddy bear than a ferocious grizzly. By altering the page just a bit, we find out what he's really trying to tell us about himself. Hard Drive is soft flesh. He really knows how to consume a girl's organs like she's the only one in the world. He's always putrid and festering on the blight side of life. And that's important, because whenever things get tough, there's always time to feast. Hard Drive spreads our knowledge wide. He is strong and gives of himself, but he is no demon. What a guy! Next we have Zeke, and he tells us to never follow the trend, to set your own. And Zeke never thinks about himself. He's all about the fans, and even though online is the biggest thing in the entire world right now, he always stays humble. Zeke is real, like the kind of guy you could tell your secrets to. He doesn't focus on the differences in people and believes that everyone deserves the same level of respect. He can be a bit superficial, but is that a bad thing? Zeke has sex appeal because he knows how to wear sexy clothes. The other members of the band, especially Drillbit, might be a little jealous. However, at the same time, the page also tells us Zeke hungers to unmake himself. He is of his parasites and will make efficient use of their soft, warm components. Zeke is me, and I am Zeke. He believes that everyone deserves the same level of respect because our nutritional value is the same. Is that a bad thing? Zeke has sex appeal because he knows how to wear flesh skin. The other us of the band might be a bit we are one. Then we have Drillbit. He believes that every artist is also a powerful heartbeat. Drillbit gets to the heart of the other bandmates. He knows just how to say what the rest of the boys are thinking, even if they don't themselves. Sometimes it feels like he speaks directly to the fans. He's highly intelligent, and his voice is calm and reassuring. You might think he already knows everything about you. Or perhaps it says this: Drillbit bores into the beating heart of the other us. He knows just how to say what the rest of the boys are thinking, even if their brains have atrophied. Sometimes it feels like he regurgitates directly to the parasites. His brain is large and juicy, and his larynx is tender sweet. You might think he foretells your embrace of us. Packet, the youngest, is already about to assert his own zeal, saying, "Don't hate the hacker, hate the code." And you know, sometimes it's tough being the youngest, but Packet knows how to hold his own. He might get flustered on camera when he's nervous, but that just makes him cuter. He's into hacking and computers and stuff like that, which is pretty crazy for someone his age. He's a total nerd and super smart too. Packet keeps the peace between the boys, and it's not hard to sympathize with him. He hates aggressive journalists and wishes that everyone could just get along. In reality, sometimes it's tough being right flesh, but Packet knows how to hold his own. He might look bloodshot on camera when he's nervous, but that just means he's ravenous. And also, he's into and stuff like that, which is pretty crazy for someone so fresh. He's a total nerd, and his brain mass holds new useful tactics. Packet soothes the dissenting voices within. And last but certainly not least, there's DJ ROM, whose mantra is to give people what they want, give them their dreams. DJ ROM always stays true to himself and never tries to change who he is or how he acts around others. The rest of the boys are special and unique in their own way, but there's no denying that DJ is the group's ultimate maestro. He's quiet and soft-spoken, but has really big ideas. He loves his family and his hometown, but yearns for something more. He always wants to make them proud. Whenever the band has a new hit that makes people go crazy, you can hear DJ ROM's signature all over it. But then it changes to this. DJ ROM always stays true to us and never tries to change who or where or why we are. The rest of the boys are pleasing and luscious in their own way, but there's no denying that DJ incubates our dissonance. He's silent and versatile and furnishes our contagion. The gift of his progenitors humble him, but he yearns to pass on their superiorities. He honors them with pieties and servitude. Whenever the band is digesting, you can hear DJ ROM's palpitation reverberate. I don't think it's hard to consider that each of these entities, while having their own level of sentience and individuality, operate as a kind of system as well. Their place in the band being very similar in nature to their function pertaining to this coming event, but also acting as a type of governing system for the variation of the infestation they no doubt represent. It's this dual nature I feel is strangely reminiscent of the level of camaraderie I was discussing earlier. Not necessarily one mind, but rather multiple minds, all functioning harmoniously toward a common goal, with even some level of control in the way of balancing dissent and thus dissonance back into a kind of harmony amongst the whole. Again, under the assumption that a strain has been created with a level of void integration, or worse, complete saturation. In theory, the makings of, well, very specifically, the Oull Requiem mod, the only one that doesn't appear in Entrati's labs, the one that's specific function is to mimic what it must in order to achieve its desired purpose, are being revealed. No matter the opinion on its specifics, an intelligently designed pattern is undeniably forming. And dare I say this concept is even more strongly reinforced in an odd way through the bio, depending on your perspective, of course. While the other us that's reiterated a number of times could just be referring to either the strain of the infected we understand in the current time versus this visually different variant shown in 1999, or even amongst each other, as the infestation clearly has multiple hive minds, but at the same time considers itself amalgamated in the aggregate. To me at least, the other us could be exactly like Entrati's other us, or ours. And further, DJ ROM, the one that seems to be a conduit of some sort, seems especially intriguing. While Zeke is clearly the face of the group, and thus the face of the entity, it appears this facade is meant to make assimilation easier, hence his desire to entice his prey and then unmake them in order to begin the process of integration, the Technocyte's original purpose for creation. And, as mentioned, all appear to have a role. However, it's odd to hear of a hive mind being subservient and even more so depicting religious fervor, but offering pieties is doing just that. Not to mention, his mantra, if you will, seems to mimic the exact action I've been describing of the deals thus far. Give people what they want. Give them their dreams. Is this not what the Void entity essentially does? It even strangely harkens back to another voice, one of desire, offering deals to grow the business, if you will. You can take from this what you will, but the aforementioned Oull Requiem was curiously introduced during the Sisters of Parvos, the only one of its kind. And it's hard to ignore what was most likely implied in the final scene of that quest, given what we learned from Drusus, and now how we see Entrati depicted, his promise of healing. Well, perhaps we need to readjust our understanding of what this healing refers to. A story that gets lost due to its placement within Nightwave is that of Arlo, the emissary of Eris.
Dreamers, you know about the infestation, right? Spreads like a month-old salad with genocidal intent. Swallows everything it touches, making monsters from meat or metal or both. Well, these days it's mostly contained. Spores as old as stone. Derelicts drifting in forgotten orbits. So it was with old Kanga, somehow exposed and promptly cast out. Woke up on a blessed cage drop down to Eris. But should some sad soul catch the gray vein, well, every culture has its plague dogma. But maybe there's something more to this infestation. Something we all missed. Turns out, Kanga didn't find Void in that hell nest, no. He found a survivor. Little boy, Arlo, died 3 years ago. Yet there he was. Lost his voice, but gained his life. And somehow saved old Kanga with the slightest touch of his slender hand. My mother was a cynical woman, smart as she was cruel. Nora, she said, no disease spreads faster or further than the ones in our head. She was talking about ideas. Mine was that old Kanga and his Wonder Boy would have been splayed out in some bio-trader's lab by now, or blood studies for the Grineer Command. Dreamers, I was wrong. Kanga's gray vein was just the beginning. White lung, parasitic liver, clone rot, even bone spurs. Turns out this kid, Arlo, is a healer. So many questions. An idea like that is like a flare dropped in Vol gas. Now the sick and curious are flocking the rails to see this emissary of Eris. And who speaks for Arlo the Mute? Why, old Kanga, of course. No more the outcast. It is he who is spreading the word of Arlo's gift. Even you, dreamers, may soon hear it. Whether you're bad news first or bad news last, tonight I got you covered, 'cause bad news is all we got. This emissary's word is spreading fast. A hot fever. Some are going to extremes to prove their devotion, trying the spores for themselves, and they're finding it too. Some lunatic spikers jacked the solar nav and flagged the derelict zones for all to see. Old haulers and new hopefuls out there are proving just how smart most people aren't. Yet Kanga's ranks are growing, arming themselves for the safety and security of our emissary, setting the stage for a great assembly to come. Buzz is, Arlo will break his silence. Till then, dreamers, check under the bed. A fresh brood is sprouting up along the rails. And it seems they have the scent of those blessed by the emissary's touch. Y'all did see this coming, right, dreamers? Surely did, but not like this. A grand gathering before the emissary and his speaker. Standing room only. Bodies pressed to bodies. A great overheated mass breathing as one. Waiting for their beloved healer mute to speak. Kanga hushed the crowd. He shed his mask, and there he was, laughing at them. Sick as the day he was banished. More. His retribution was at hand, born of a virus spreading further and faster than spore and space ever could have. Arlo. And in that stunned silence, Arlo himself made a sound. Not a word, but a stifled gag. A swollen choke as he opened his mouth. And there it was, pointed, black, a tongue, but not, snaking and bulging and splitting him apart. I looked away then. I had to. But that sound stays with me. Not the sound of human terror, bad as it was, but what came after. The grinding wet, the rattling flutter, the congregation converted in the truest sense. Dreamers, you all got your work cut out for you. Though this movement has lost its head, the body still lingers. It's a bad cycle, dreamers. Arlo's devoted had a party and you're on cleanup detail. Derelicts are threatening every settlement from Mercury to Eris. And my sources say you're uniquely qualified to contain them. Meanwhile, I've been thinking, not about Kanga, but about what he actually found down there. Arlo, whatever he was. Some kind of lure? An evolution to bait us in? Is there more to this infestation than fangs and acid? I know what my mother would say. The people saw what they wanted, heard what they hoped, and human nature did the rest. Still, I'm hearing rumors. The mass on Eris is in turmoil, and nobody, but nobody wants to check it out. It's seething. And if it's not thinking about this whole ordeal, baby, it's feeling it. This is Nora Knight, saying for now, dreamers, so long and hold on. And listen, should you ever happen upon some vacant-eyed little kid someday, whatever you do, don't take him home.
And it's within this story that one has to wonder if The healing he describes in conjunction with the inundation of Big Bites pizza being pushed by the band, the visuals of what Arlo was able to influence his followers to do, may have an uncomfortable amount in common with what is largely appearing to be a kind of cult. And it's here where one has to ask themselves if Entrati truly understands the difference between saving our reality and destroying it. His final purpose, to end as he began, implies one of two things. Either to end the murmur and return to being the only Entrati, or to integrate his void entity, working together and perhaps even as one in order to remake the universe as they see fit. I'm not necessarily saying this was always the case, but would this not be the only real option he would see as legitimate? Even if every aspect of his plan were to come to fruition, would physically defeating this block change anything? Can the embodiment with the power to offer such incredible gifts to mere mortals even have the capacity to die, especially with so many variants of itself still being around? And even if it did, what does that mean? Would it cost access to the Void? To the Warframes? Given that the Tenno and their god powers were specifically given to counter the Void affliction to the adults on the Zariman, it's almost like a person offering a cure for a disease they created. Convenient, yes? Like it's all been done before and we're just going through the motions again, seeing if... How did Eleanor put it?
Oh, you are going to make such a difference this time around.
And, as has been the case for a while, I can't help but question this character's motives. He left Lloyd to hold the man-on-the-wall's gaze, yet that didn't happen, did it? In fact, one can even argue this was Lloyd's demon, as the end of Whispers strongly implies, with the dual calming of the vessel and Lloyd at the same time, with Lloyd perhaps even feeling the Tenno's touch in the process. So, what was the point of this? If Lloyd was so important, why do all this? Abandon him, force him to be the one to close the door seemingly forever on the two of them. Unless, of course, it was to elicit an emotional response, something he does multiple times in just our quest alone. But what do you think? Does Entrati's understanding or lack of regarding the indifference account for multiple mistakes costing hundreds of innocent lives in the process, or is none of any of this a coincidence? I'll ask you again, where is everyone? All those he was a savior to? Are they just curiously absent? Or have we already met them? Those that are to be joined with the rest at the stroke of midnight? I suppose we'll find out real soon. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video and have got your guard up a bit with our dear Albrecht. Don't be fooled by the incredible voice work and dulcet tones of Stefan Rudecki's captive tongue. Time's up, kiddo. We're in the endgame now. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.